Ours is a relatively young industry. When Frank Reynolds began as one of its early practitioners, radio was where the stars assembled. Television was more of a technological curiosity. But during Frank's 35-year career, the impact of television has exploded to an amazing degree. A top-flight professional, Frank Reynolds cared about the truth, about fairness, and about meeting his own high standards. Nightline correspondent Jeff Greenfield traces Frank Reynolds' career as a television journalist.
Good evening, and welcome to the first broadcast of the World News Tonight. Speaking for all the men and women of ABC News, I promise you an accurate, responsible, and meaningful report on events at home and abroad. We are aware of our responsibility to you, and we intend to meet it.
Responsibility. In a career spanning 35 years, from a small Indiana radio station to network TV anchor, the essence of Frank Reynolds was responsibility. He took his work seriously in an era when TV anchors were supposed to be comfortable, casual, reassuring. And Reynolds remained a serious newsman in an era that saw change of the most fundamental, far-reaching sort come to the business of television news. Frank Reynolds was born 59 years ago in East Chicago, Indiana. After college and infantry service in World War II, he began work at a Hammond, Indiana radio station, then moved to Chicago in 1949, where he became a pioneer in early TV journalism. His first love was sportscasting.
Frank Reynolds was one of the best sports broadcasters I've ever heard. On a little radio station in Hammond, Indiana, he could cover any kind of a story. An emotional story, a story of poor, innocent people.
Well, it's beginning to rain. This little baby, how old is the baby?
A year, 3 months old.
She might get sick out here.
He showed what he felt and what was in his heart. And I think perhaps, while some might think that was a fault, I think it was his greatest asset.
In 1965, Reynolds joined ABC News. It was a time when the network news operation was something of a stepchild.
At that time, ABC News was about fourth in a three-network race, if you can be that low. Now, we had a very small organization working on a very slim budget.
By 1968, Reynolds was co-anchoring the evening news with Howard K. Smith. He was also offering sharp commentary, which did not sit well in some high circles.
Don't give anybody a chance to say the old gut fighter, go for the jugular Nixon is finally showing himself once more. Just take it easy, and above all, keep your cool. Well, that's difficult, especially when his natural instinct is to smash the enemy with a club or go after him with a meat axe.
Had this slander been made by one political candidate about another, it would have been dismissed by most commentators as a partisan attack. But this attack emanated from the privileged sanctuary of a network studio, and therefore had the apparent dignity of an objective statement.
In December 1970, Reynolds was replaced as evening news anchor. He bade farewell to his audience with his customary candor.
But I'm not going to suggest that I'm completely happy about what has happened to me, for it is also the truth that I don't like it one bit and see no reason to pretend that I do. Like most prisoners, I was put here against my will, and like most prisoners, I would prefer to pick my own time to leave. However, such matters are decided elsewhere, and I have no quarrel with the judgment that it is time for a change.
But after a brief period on the fringes, Reynolds returned to the center, at a time when television news was being shaken to its roots.
Hi, Governor. Hi, I don't want to take away from your great moment here. Hi, Nancy. Mrs. Reagan.
TV had become the center ring of American politics, where candidates for president were expected to debate each other face to face.
Mr. President, when you came into office, you spoke very eloquently.
The communications satellite and other technologies had collapsed national boundaries, enabling historic adversaries to meet face to face.
So that after tomorrow, your ambassadors, for example, your two ambassadors in Washington, can meet and talk?
Why not?
Well, because they never have before.
It has never happened, yes. But I said today we are ready.
There should always be a beginning.
The confines of the news studio had become as limitless as the globe. An anchor could report the news from the coal fields of West Virginia.
Here in the coal fields, it is clear that something more important than 3 months' pay has been lost by these people. They have lost faith in their government and in the leaders of their union. They feel
or the capitals of the world.
Good evening from Versailles.
This is Frank Reynolds in Jerusalem.
This is Frank Reynolds in Saigon. This is Frank Reynolds with the President in Punta del Este. This is Frank Reynolds in Leningrad. This is Frank Reynolds among friends on San Rafael Street in Havana.
And sometimes, even the world wasn't the limit.
Columbia, the space shuttle, ready to go. The first rays of the sun breaking now across the eastern United States. Most of the country still in darkness, but here at the Kennedy Space Center on Cape Canaveral, it is the dawn of a new day and a new era in the history of flight.
Frank was the person that enabled us at ABC News to develop what at first we called the floating anchor, the sub-anchor. That is, the anchor who moved out from behind the desk. Anchors now, as a matter of course, are out there, whether it's Sadat meeting Begin or it's the day Jaruzelski ends martial law in Poland or a summit somewhere. Anchors are on the scene. And Frank Reynolds was very much one of the innovators of that kind of work.
And with the impact of instant news came dilemmas. What happens when there is no time for editorial judgment? When apparently sound information, the reported death of Press Secretary Jim Brady during a 1981 assassination attempt on President Reagan, turns out to be wrong.
It's true, but we did have reports from the hospital earlier and from the White House that he had passed away. We know that he was in very critical condition. Let's get it nailed down, somebody. Let's find out. I don't apologize for my display of anger. It was anger, and it was anger directed more at myself than at anybody else, certainly, because I really regretted that I had not insisted on further corroboration.
He was not someone you could push around when he felt that he was wronged or that the situation was not appropriate or and somehow out of step. He was the first to express it as well. And that's a valuable asset, I think, in journalism. And Frank encompassed all of those things. He was, at the core, a thoroughly professional reporter.
Frank also had a real emotional connection with the news. He felt it. And sometimes he let that feeling show. And that's not always a bad idea.
Frank has always been a get-up fighter. Get knocked down, get up. And I guess I really expected him to get up. And this time, when he didn't get up, to say that I was shocked would be an understatement.
Frank was a genuine journalist. He didn't want to get in the way of the news. He wanted to report it to people, and it never occurred to him to think what he might look like or how he was lit or whether his mic made him sound good or bad. It's one of the reasons he was such a pure journalist and one of the reasons he was such an inspiration to all of us here at ABC News.
But perhaps the most impressive tribute was paid to Frank Reynolds during his lifetime by his critics. He always took the news so seriously, they said. He acted as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders, they said. Well, maybe Frank Reynolds knew what some others in this medium have forgotten, or never knew at all. That matters of life and death, war and peace, wealth and poverty are indeed serious, and so is the power and the responsibility carried by this medium. Television is the way we learn about the world now, and Frank Reynolds helped us learn about that world fairly, accurately, and responsibly. This is Jeff Greenfield for Nightline in New York.
In a moment, we'll talk with three of Frank's colleagues, Peter Jennings, Harry Reasoner, and Howard K. Smith.
My partner and I were investigating the lettuce shortage and a new dressing from 7 Seas.
Whew, that was close.
I see it. New 7 Seas creamy Parmesan dressing.
Creamy Parmesan?
With real Parmesan cheese. Imagine the taste. Authentic Parmesan cheese in a creamy, smooth dressing.
New 7 Seas creamy Parmesan. We're caught. Say something.
With new 7 Seas creamy Parmesan,
our lettuce shortage may never end.
You know, I happened to tell my Allstate agent about how everything I have 2 of.
Hi, Dad. Hi, Dad.
Right. Like 2 cars, he asked? Maybe Allstate's 2-car discount can save you money on insurance. Allstate sure saves me. I can use the money.
Noah! Dinner!
1 wife.
Bring in your policy. Allstate's multi-car discount may save you money. You're in good hands with Allstate.
You're looking at the unexpected granola bar.
Unexpectedly moist. Not crumbling. Unexpectedly chewy.
Chewy granola bars from Quaker. Unexpected.
A granola bar with chocolate chips.
Unexpectedly moist and chewy.
You can certainly see the difference in a Quaker Chewy granola bar, but it's a lot more fun to taste it.
Unexpectedly moist and chewy.
Quaker Chewy granola bars.
It's delicious.
Would you like to buy a home, build a home? Would you like to add on to the home you have, get a second mortgage, a student loan, or write your own loan through our line of credit program? All you have to do is ask me. Ask any of us at Fidelity Federal. We have money to lend, and we're ready to lend it. So establish your credit today at any office of Fidelity Federal and find out how easy we can say yes.
How often should you have your brakes checked? As often as you have your teeth cleaned. And that's the point. Most people don't think about brakes until they know there's something wrong with them. By that time, the problem is usually more serious than it would have been with regular checkups. Don't wait for your brakes to tell you there's something wrong. Bring your car to Bill King's Braco for a free brake inspection. If you have a problem, we'll show it to you. Think of it as preventive medicine. The free brake inspection from the specialists at Bill King's Braco.
Joining us now are three distinguished colleagues of Frank Reynolds. In our Washington Bureau, former ABC News anchorman Howard K. Smith. In our Boston Bureau, Harry Reisner, also a former ABC News anchorman, now with CBS News 60 Minutes. And also in Washington, ABC News World News Tonight anchorman Peter Jennings. Howard, Frank's career, as did yours for that matter, as does yours, has spanned that entire era from the moment that television was really an infant to this great explosion that we see today. And I wonder if you would kind of reminisce about Frank's career and how that describes what has happened to television over the past 30 years.
Well, Frank and I knew one another back in the 1950s. He was the Chicago correspondent for CBS, and I was the brand new Chief Washington correspondent for CBS. And we've known one another ever since. Shortly after I came to ABC, he came to ABC. As someone remarked a while ago, those were our poverty years. And we had a pretty good staff, but a very small one. But when Peter deserted us and went abroad, we were without an anchorman. And we had a very hard time hunting for one. Our bosses did. I finally suggested to them they not try to find one outside the organization. We had one in the organization, and that was Frank. I think I persuaded them. They finally tried. They said he wouldn't accept the offer. One of the oddities of his career is he did not want to be anchorman. As he said in a piece we heard just a moment ago, he did not want the job. But they made him an offer. They phoned me and told me he turned it down. And then I said, raise the offer. And they did, and he came to my office, Frank did, 5 days after that, and said, I'm afraid I'm lost. They've made me an offer I can't refuse. And I said, thank God.
Harry Reisner, the big money to which Howard has just alluded in passing tends, I suppose, to obscure what is required of people in this business, and that is a professionalism that, unfortunately, is all too rarely found. Why is it that the big money seems to drive it out rather than bring it in?
I disagree, Ted. I've been listening all day to people talking about Frank Reynolds. And I think they're building a picture of him that is not all that true. And I don't think the big money drives it out. I mean, the big money brought in and kept Howard K. Smith and Walter Cronkite and Frank Reynolds and me, if you don't mind. The money is nice, but it is to some extent irrelevant. And I speak as was tactfully avoided by Mr. Greenfield. I speak as the man who took Frank Reynolds' job. Yeah. For what at the time was the biggest money anybody ever had 13 years ago. But the nice thing to remember now is that 7.5 years later, Frank Reynolds took my job. So these things tend to work themselves out.
All right, but there's you have tactfully ignored the reason that you were invited to take Frank's job, and I'm going to be less tactful even, and remind you of it, and that is that we here at ABC had this great feeling of insecurity. You were then, as you are now, the big star at CBS. Frank was a homegrown product.
Well, I don't think that was entirely it. I mean, the hardest phone call I ever made in my life was the night of the day that it was announced that I was replacing Frank. And I called him. And I said, this is a very hard phone call for me to make. He said, well, we aren't exactly singing Christmas carols here. This was at his home in Connecticut. Surveys indicated that for whatever strange reason, they thought Howard and I would be a better combination than Howard and Frank. And as is somehow lost sight of in many recent reports, Howard and I did bring ABC to parity, and we're proud of it. Now, why that happens, why somebody would like me, but let me say, you know, that it's very sad when a man dies who is younger than you are, and Frank was a year younger than I am. Why they would like me and Howard better than Frank and Howard, I don't know. But it did not, the picture that is being painted of Frank as a kind of a saint, one of my colleagues said today, one of the last of a dwindling band of people who believe that you should be honest in reporting the news. I don't think that's true. I think you believe that, Ted. I think Tom Brokaw believes it. I think Roger Mudd, who's not all that old, believes it. I don't think we're a dwindling band, and I don't think Frank would like to be pictured as an outcast or as a man fighting the networks. And Elmer Lauer talked a few minutes ago on this broadcast. ABC was trying to get an audience, and they had a lot of handicaps. They didn't have the stations. They didn't have stations like this one. They did a lot of things without compromising themselves, and I think they would have done it with Frank Reynolds, they would have done it with Howard K. Smith, they would have done it with Peter Jennings, and they finally did it through a combination of things. But I don't think Frank would like to be pictured as an outlaw charging against corporate greed, and he wasn't that way. What he was a gentleman, and
Peter,
there are not many of those in any profession.
Pick up that theme, if you would, Peter, because I think Harry makes a fair point. Maybe we haven't been honest as journalists all day long. I don't recall having heard anything said about Frank today in all the praise that was untrue, but maybe there's been too much of the emphasis on the saintly nature. He was just a damn good reporter, wasn't he?
Yeah, Ted, I tried to make that point, I really think, in the final comment we made on World News Tonight, by saying that reporters, and Frank was a reporter, like to be judged by their work. I agree with what Harry is saying, and I don't doubt for a second that on this day, Frank Reynolds, like anybody else, I think, in that situation, would have very mixed emotions about the tributes. I think he would have enjoyed it, in part, but I think he would also, as I think Harry has said, and I think Howard has said, and as I think you and I and most others would say, that this highly personalizing of the news in the presence of an anchorman was not a good thing. Now, it's been almost a given over the years, I think, that anchormen say that. And then there is the question of the money, and there is the question of ratings and everything else. But I honestly think that most anchormen, by and large, do feel that the system, which has evolved, is slightly off kilter. I think Frank believed that. As to whether we went too far today, for someone in the public arena, and for someone who was very much liked by his colleagues, I mean, first of all, Frank was a friend. Secondly, Frank was a colleague. Frank had three families. He had his own family, to whom he was devoted and very close. He had his ABC family, in which he was, like Howard, myself, and you, part of the real old boy network from the early 60s. And he had an audience family. Now, I've been sitting in his office for the last couple of weeks, and the place is full of letters connected with Frank in a very personal, human, familial sort of way. So what we did today is what we felt today. I don't think we made it up. I said at one point this evening, yeah, sure, he wore his heart on his sleeve. I heard Walter Cronkite say, and it wasn't such a bad thing. I don't think anything we said today was wrong.
Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and talk some more.
We are Chevrolet. Take a look at Chevy Citation and see why it has outsold all front-wheel drives over the last 3 years combined. Hatchback versatility with 20 cubic feet of wagon-like convenience. Comfortable room for 5 people. And an electronic fuel-injected standard engine with better mileage estimates than 41 smaller cars.
Now, get low 9.9% financing on new Chevy Citations. But hurry, offer ends July 31st.
Listen, Grandpa.
Nature undisturbed. I'm proud my grandson appreciates it. These mornings make us hungry for the natural goodness of grape nuts. Concentrated into every nugget is the goodness of nature's wheat and barley, with no sugar or artificial preservatives added, just a natural sweetness and a crunchy, nutty taste.
Delicious.
Post grape nuts, raisin grape nuts flakes. Good taste, compliments of nature.
Every morning, I use Listerine antiseptic for me. In the morning, your mouth has millions more bad breath germs than the night before. Listerine kills the germs that can cause morning breath. At night, I use it a second time for Lori. Listerine Strong works for hours. One time for me.
A second time for me.
Listerine, twice a day.
One time for me.
A second time for me.
Now save $1 on Listerine 32-ounce size. See store display for details.
GE brings good things to life. At Roadrunner Electric, we bring the price. And today, with the purchase of any GE color console television, get this GE 12-inch black and white television free. From the company that brings you your kind of furniture and appliances at your kind of price. A free 12-inch GE black and white television with any GE color console purchase. That's Roadrunner Electric, Alexander Plaza, Franklin, Tennessee.
Supercuts. We're changing the way America cuts its hair. We're the only ones who do it.
At Supercuts, we invented a whole new technique for cutting hair. So you get a super looking haircut every time at a super price. No wonder everyone's coming to Supercuts. Well, almost everyone.
We're changing the way America cuts its hair. Supercuts. Supercuts.
Joining us once again to discuss the times and the career of Frank Reynolds are Howard K. Smith, Harry Reasoner, and Peter Jennings. Harry, let me pick up the cudgel just a little bit. When you refer to yourself and the other fine names in the business to whom you referred, you're really talking about the best and the brightest. What I was talking about is the tendency that seems to happen in our industry, and I mean throughout the industry, to go for other qualities than those that I think are represented by Frank Reynolds. That's why I think it's so important to point to those aspects of him.
Well, there's absolutely no argument with pointing to those aspects of Frank Reynolds or any good journalist. But what my point is, with no derogation of Frank, I admire tremendously. My point is that I don't think that the standards of network correspondence have descended that much. You know, you're, what, 20 years younger than I am, Ted? 25 years younger?
No, about 20, I guess.
20?
Not even that much.
No, I don't. And Tom Brokaw is 20 years younger. Charles Kuralt is 12 years younger. Almost everybody is younger than I am these days. Frank Reynolds was. I don't see that the dedication has deteriorated. I don't know what's happening at local news. There was Charles Kuralt made a speech saying that there's an awful lot of emphasis on hairspray, which you can't argue with, Ted. But I think that was because Charles is bald and has been since he was 28. But I don't think we are descending. And my point is, I don't think Frank would like to be pictured as the last of a vanishing breed or one of the last. We're still stumbling along trying to do our job. Peter is, Brokaw is, Mudd is, Cronkite is, Rather is. What is Rather? Some kind of new guy who doesn't pay attention to news, doesn't believe in it?
Listen, he's the old man on the block now. I think Dan is probably the oldest of the nightly anchors.
No, he's 4 years younger than Mudd.
Oh, all right.
I keep track of these things.
Howard, let me jump back to you because you belong to really the most elite of all the broadcasting groups, I guess, that ever was, and that's the Edward R. Murrow School.
That's a way of saying I'm older than Harry is.
I'd like to have a chance to take advantage of this electronic hookup to say hello to Howard, who I have not seen in some years and who I respect.
It's quite a while, but I do see you.
Listen, that's the second most important reason for bringing you all on here today. But let's get back to the first.
Ted, I don't think that Frank was saintly in any respect, but I do think he carried conviction to an unusual degree when talking to people, and was accepted in people's homes for that reason. And he was an extremely skilled newsman, technically and in substance. And I think that's all that I have said about him. I don't think he was more saintly than others. In fact, I sometimes worried when he lost his temper on the air. That made him a better human being to me, but for an anchorman delivering a message, I thought that was not right.
As one looks, though, going back through the years from the Murrow era to, let's say, the Frank Reynolds era, then, for the moment, to what might be called the rather Brokaw-Jennings era. How is journalism doing? How is the American public being served?
I think the American public's being served better and better. In part, it's because of money. They're paying more money to get more reporters and more picture reports in than ever before. Originally, you know, the evening news programs were 15 minutes apiece, and they were really dominated by men who were rather like announcers. Well, I shan't mention any names, but Walter Cronkite was brought in late because they thought it was high time to bring in a newsman to be the anchorman of a network program. The same was true of Huntley and then Brinkley. They were latecomers. There was someone before them, whose name I shan't mention, who was not altogether considered a newsman. I think now they're all newsmen, and I think the quality is very high.
Peter, any final thoughts that you'd like to deliver on Frank, the industry, where we go from here?
Yes, and it's very simple, Ted. Tomorrow is Thursday. A lot's going to happen in the world tomorrow. We will probably not talk as much about Frank tomorrow as we have done today, and that's just about the way I think he'd like it.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you all very much. Peter Jennings, Howard K. Smith, Harry Reasoner, it was very good of you all to come in. I'd like to offer a final personal note. Ours is not a business that promotes privacy, nor is it an industry that normally favors substance over style. And as the late Alan Sherman once wrote, television makes prisoners of us all by paying us more than we're worth. So how was it that a painfully shy, and he was that, intensely private journalist of great substance like Frank Reynolds, a man who eschewed the fast lane and the high life, how was it that he was such a success in our business? No answers tonight, but those of us charged with trying to maintain the high standards set by Frank Reynolds may learn something as we ponder the question. We'll miss him, and so will you. I'll be back in a moment.